Hey, so we're in chapter 13, and we're going to be talking about the destruction of Babylon, which comes in the last days. Um, for reference, we're in Isaiah chapter 13. 14 also talks about this, but Jeremiah 50 and 51 and Revelation 17 and 18 also are talking about the same thing, and they're talking about the destruction of Babylon that comes in tribulation. All right. So, um, just just to clear some things up before we start getting into verses. Um, so, history talks about the fall of Babylon when the Medes and the Persians conquered it. Um, they did conquer it. They did not destroy it. So they actually made it their capital. They took it without a fight. So they did not destroy Babylon. They made it their capital. So, what we are going to be talking about is the complete destruction of it in the end time. Some people will try to sell you um, that it was already destroyed by the Medes and the Persians, but that didn't happen. They made it their capital. So, totally different thing, two different things we're talking about here. So, um, so Isaiah, when he's writing this, we talked about this before, but Babylon hasn't even risen to power yet. When he's writing this, Assyria is the world power, dominant world power. So Babylon hasn't even risen to power yet. So he's writing it about 100 years before Babylon even rises to power. So must have sounded weird to his readers. So I'm just going to give you a few facts about ancient Babylon before we start getting into verses. So it was the dominant world empire. Um, it was surrounded by a wall 350 feet high, 87 feet thick. So that's big. But it was the world empire. So the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, they have uncovered it and they have rebuilt it. I don't know about all of it, but they have rebuilt some of it. Nebuchadnezzar's throne room has been reconstructed, and it is 165 feet long and 143 feet wide. So, if you remember, Nebuchadnezzar's throne room is where the hand appeared to Belshazzar and wrote writing on the wall, and Daniel had to interpret it. So, that's the room that it happened in. Um, so that's where we get the expressions, the writing on the wall. So, anyway, Daniel had to interpret this for Belshazzar because he was getting threatened by the Medes and the Persians at that time, and he was so conceited he didn't take it for anything. He just took it like a grain of salt and didn't prepare and didn't get his army together. So he actually had a dinner that night, and that's while he's having this dinner. That's when the hand appears out of nowhere and starts writing this inscription on the wall. So Nebuchadnezzar's wife was actually still alive at that time, and she remembered Daniel and how he could interpret things. So she told them to get a hold of Daniel and have him interpret it, and he did. All right, so he interpreted it for them, and basically the inscription said that his days were numbered, and the Babylonian kingdom would be given to the Medes and the Persians. And it happened that night. He was killed, and the Medes and the Persians took over. Which here's another reason why we know that what they're talking about here is not Babylon being conquered before, and that is going to still to happen, is because Cyrus takes over when they conquer Babylon, and he is presented a scroll from Isaiah that calls him by name. So Isaiah had prophesied and wrote down a message from God to Cyrus and calls him by name in the scroll. And it's like 150 years before this even happened. Isaiah writes it down, and we'll learn about this in 44 and 45. But anyway, and God tells him to release the Jews from captivity, and he does. So, also, I want to say that in the interpretation where it said that his days were numbered, that's another saying that we get, like, your number's up. That's where that comes from. So, anyway, just some more. Um, just some more about Babylon and how we're talking about it being the destruction in the end time. Um, a couple of hundred years after Cyrus and the Persians take over, um, there was another, it was conquered again. And Alexander the Great actually conquers the Persians, and he also conquers the whole entire known world. And if I remember right, it was talking about how he conquered it by the time he was 29 years old, and he actually laid on his bed and wept because there was no more known world that anyone knew of to conquer. So craziness. But anyway, Alexander the Great made Babylon his capital, and he died there. So it was not destructed, it was not desolate, okay, but it will be in the future, and that's what we're going to talk about. So the Persians and the Medes take over Babylon, and they take it without a fight. Because he did not get ready for the invasion. He actually had this dinner, and so the writing appears on the wall. Daniel interprets it. So something else about Babylon, Saddam Hussein actually held receptions there in 1987, and I think it had to do with their elections or whatever, not sure. But he had receptions there in Nebuchadnezzar's throne room in 1987. So we know from Genesis 10 the origin of Babylon. So Nimrod discovered this city along with other cities, but he discovered it in Genesis 10, and he was a dictator. He was the first world dictator. And at that time, it wasn't called Babylon, it was called Babel. All right, so it is the city of man spiritually, city of Satan. So, not good. So it's always been known since they built the tower for religious defilement. Okay, it's where all false religions started. So it's spiritually unchanged today. So we know in Genesis 14, actually Jerusalem shows up, and Jerusalem it was originally called Salem. So it shows up Genesis 14, and Melchizedek is the first one who appears there. So if you guys don't know who Melchizedek is, Abraham actually paid tithes to him. He was a king and a priest, and there's only 3 mentioned in the Bible. Melchizedek, one, Jesus is the other one, and you and I, in the kingdom age, are kings and priests. 3 times it's mentioned in the Bible. Melchizedek is one of them. Melchizedek is not a name; it's a title. So he is a king and a priest, and his title means King of Righteousness and Priest of the Most High God. So that is his title, and that's what the name Melchizedek means. He actually predates Levitical priest. We know that from Psalm 10 and Hebrews 5, 6, and 7. So that's significant. So anytime something is mentioned the first time in the Bible, pay attention to it. So definitely, because it means something. So this is where Jerusalem shows up in the Bible. This is where Melchizedek shows up in the Bible, and he's a king and a priest. So first time it's mentioned here. All right, so you have Babel, the city where religious or spiritual defilement started, and then we have Jerusalem, which is God's city. So they contrast each other, and you can kind of look at this as like a tale of 2 cities in some sort of sense. So, because they both start in Genesis, and they will both be climaxed in the book of Revelation. So Babylon is going to be judged in the book of Revelation, and Jerusalem is going to be replaced by the heavenly Jerusalem. So they both be climaxed in the book of Revelation. All right, so let's get into these verses here. We're going to read 1 through 3 here. The burden against Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. Verse 2, lift up a banner on high on the high mountain. Raise your voice to them, wave your hand, that they may enter the gates of the nobles. I have commanded my sanctified ones. I have also called my mighty ones for my anger, those who rejoice in my exaltation. So he's not calling them to minister. He's not calling them for good things. He's calling them in his anger for battle. That's what he's calling them in for. So he's calling his sanctified and his mighty ones in for battle. And Psalm 2 has a reference to this. I'll just pop over real quick and read it because it talks about this, and it talks about what happens and how God laughs at them for coming against him. So it says the title for it is The Messiah's Triumph and Kingdom. And this is in the book of Psalm. So why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. Who comes against God? who actually develops an army against God? Crazy. Okay, so he who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep pleasure. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion, which is Jesus. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now, therefore, be wise, O kings, be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all those who put their trust in him. So this is talking about exactly what we're going over right now. And they try to come against God because they don't want Jesus ruling over them. So, which is crazy. Let me go back to Isaiah here. All right. So we got through 3, I think. Yeah. Okay, so Psalm 2 is referencing, like I said, the exact same thing that we're talking about. Verse 4. The noise of the multitude in the mountains, like that of many people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts musters the army for battle. Verse 5, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven, the Lord and his weapons of indignation to destroy the whole land. So we're talking about a gathering of nations here, and they're coming, like I said, to war against God. So because they don't want Messiah ruling over them, which I just find crazy. That's just crazy to me to think about. So this time we're talking about here, this is tribulation. This is Armageddon. This is the close of Daniel's 70th week. Okay. They're trying to gather to hinder the establishing of God setting up his kingdom here. That's what they're trying to hinder. So, excuse me. Verse 5, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven, the Lord and his weapon of indignation to destroy the whole land. Verse 6, wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty, so God's going to destroy it. And we're talking about the vengeance and wrath of God, the great tribulation, his vengeance and wrath being poured out on these nations, which is scary. I do not want to have anything to do with God's wrath. And we don't have to. We'll come to that here in a minute. So there it says, verse 7, therefore all hands will be limp, every man's heart will melt, and they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames. So it says, therefore all hands will be limp and every heart will melt. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine being faced with God's wrath? I mean, you can't even fathom it. All right. So, and they will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. So, labor pains, and this is referenced a lot in the end time. So we see labor pains today going on as signs of the times, you know. So it's a key expression. It always refers to the end time. So God is going to be punishing the world for its evil, and we'll come to that here in just a second. So it says, verse 9, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light, the sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. Can you imagine how dark it will be here without the sun and the moon and the stars shining? They're going to go dark. So it's going to be dark, dark. So he's punishing the world for its evil. And we'll start with verse 11 here. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. All right. So he's pouring his wrath out. And we know that from Scripture that we are not appointed to God's wrath. We are not of the world. So Jesus tells us that we're not of the world because he is not of the world. So he says that in John, and God has not appointed us to his wrath, and we know that from Thessalonians 5:9. So Christ bore God's wrath for us. He took care of our sin for us. He took on our sin and bore God's wrath, so we didn't have to. And there's no way to even, the implications of what that even means, I don't even think we can fathom. So we'll never be good enough for his grace and mercy and what he did. We'll never deserve it. We'll never be good enough because we can't even fathom what it takes to pay the price. So God's wrath is going to be poured out on the Christ-rejecting world. That's who his wrath is going to be poured out on in tribulation. That's why it's so important for us to gather souls while we can. So, all right. Now, verse 12, I will make a mortal more rare than fine gold, a man more than the golden wedge of Ophir. Okay. What he's talking about here is the very existence of the human race is going to be threatened. Threatened for extermination. That's never happened. There's going to be a tremendous slaughter. That's what he's talking about. 13, therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth will be moved out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. Okay, we'll stop there. So, therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. So, this could mean, don't know, but this could mean that the earth is going to move out of orbit. And it's been said that before it was tilted in this orbit, they think possibly that there was no tilt in the axis that we sit on, that it sat straight up and down, and that they know for a fact that the North and the South Pole, they didn't have polar caps, that there was plush vegetation there because they found signs of it. It speaks of in Genesis, and when I studied Genesis, it went through how the earth at that time was totally different before the flood. There was like a moisture cap over the whole earth, and it was one climate. There was no winds coming from the polar caps, creating storms and all those things. It was just beautiful, very plush vegetation, beautiful. And if that happened, the earth would kind of normalize, and we were sitting on the same axis. straight up and down with no tilt. And so the deserts would go away, very, very plush. And we know that God says most definitely that he's going to shake it. And Isaiah 24:20 tells us that God speaks out, um, or speaks about, not speaks out, the earth staggering to and fro like a drunken man. So he's going to shake it. So we also know that we've studied this already, that he's going to restore the earth. And it's going to be like it was when the Garden of Eden. So he's going to restore it to its original potential and what it was supposed to be in the beginning before man fell. So maybe that has something to do with it. Not sure. Just thought it was interesting. So verse 14. Excuse me. It shall be as a hunted gazelle, and as sheep that no man takes up. Every man will turn to his own people, and everyone will flee to his own land. The gazelle, the hunted gazelle, is a reference to the Jews. When he talks about, and as a sheep no man takes up, that implies that some of the sheep will stay there, and some of them are going to be left. Or some of them are going to be taken up and some of them are going to be left. Sorry. All right. So everyone will flee to his own land. Verse 15, everyone who is found will be thrust through, and everyone who is captured will fall by the sword. Their children also will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Verse 17, behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, who will not regard silver, and as far as gold, they will not delight in it. So what he's talking about is the Medes are actually the Kurdish people. They live in Iran. They do not like Iraqis. And we've talked about already that what we're talking about is the plains of Shinar here, which are southern Iraq, where Babylon is. And they don't like Iraqis. So what he's talking about, he's going to stir them up against them, and it won't be because they want silver and gold. It's going to be because they loathe them already. All right, so verse 18, also their bows will dash the young men to pieces, and they will have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eye will not spare children, and Babylon the glory of kingdoms. I'll stop there for a second. So bows in Hebrew actually mean for shooting. That's what they mean. So we're talking probably about launchers and missiles here. The Hebrew actually says for shooting. So could be. Okay, verse 19. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, so the Chaldeans, we're talking about the spirit of Babylon here, the inhabitants and their pride. The Chaldean pride, a very prideful people, and because they had conquered the whole world. Okay, so we're talking about the people in this time who live in the plains of Shinar, and so God's going to stir the Kurds up against them, and basically they're going to be destroyed. And he says, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So, fire from heaven. That's what it means. So that's when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. They were destroyed from fire from heaven. All right, so we'll finish this up here. Verse 20, it will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation, nor will the Arabian pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds there, but wild beasts of the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls, ostriches will dwell there, and wild goats will caper there. Wild goats are demons. The hyenas will howl in their citadels, and jackals in their pleasant places. Her time is near to come, and her days will not be prolonged. So that's the end of it. But we're talking about, this is how you know that we're talking about end time stuff here, not talking about the destruction that happened to it, the conquering and the falling that happened to it, as we presently know, by the Medes and the Persians. That's not a time that we're talking about. And we know that because of everything, basically everything that we just went over. and it's talking about it will never be inhabited again, and it was inhabited after that. So um, anyway, um, I will start working on chapter 14, which deals, I think, halfway through, maybe through with the same thing. We're going to be going over some more of this and getting into some exciting stuff. All right, see you next time.